My sister punched me so hard that the taste of blood filled my mouth before I even realized she had swung. The next thing I knew, my mother's hands were in my hair, pulling, dragging, screaming something about betrayal, about how I had destroyed everything. The marble floor of our family's house felt cold against my knees, and all I could think was that this house, the one my father built brick by brick, was watching us unravel. I tried to stand, but Olivia's knee caught my ribs sharp and mean. I heard myself gasp more in disbelief than pain. My own sister, my mother. They didn't look like family anymore. They looked like strangers wearing the faces of people I once loved. I remember the chandelier flickering above me, my reflection fractured in every crystal. I remember the metallic smell of blood, the clatter of my phone as it slid across the tiles, and the echo of my mother's voice shouting, "You think you can outsmart us, Grace!" I had never heard her call me by my first name, like that flat, formal venomous. It was always sweetheart or baby before. That was the moment I understood something irreversible had snapped. They weren't just angry, they were desperate, and desperate people don't stop at words. The siren wail came faint at first, a thin thread of sound from somewhere down the hill, growing louder. But before the blue lights reached the windows, before the officers even touched the doorbell, I had already made my decision. I would never again let them speak for me. Because what they didn't know, what they could never have imagined, was that everything they were trying to steal had already been moved, protected, locked away where neither of them could touch it. I had been preparing for this moment for months, quietly, methodically, while pretending to be the daughter and sister they wanted. Every dinner conversation, every forced smile, every "I'm fine" had been another layer of camouflage. Now, as I pressed a trembling hand against my split lip and felt the vibration of the approaching sirens through the floor, I realized the irony. They had finally forced me into the open, and that was the only place I could win. My breath came short and hot. The dispatcher's voice on the phone still buzzed faintly where it had fallen, asking if I was safe, asking if I could speak. I couldn't answer. There are moments in life when words collapse under the weight of truth. The truth was that my mother had turned into my enemy, my sister into my attacker, and my home into a battlefield. But the war wasn't over. The doorbell rang. The sound was soft, almost polite, but it cut through the chaos like a blade. The flashing blue from the cruiser washed over the foyer walls, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel fear. I felt something else entirely: relief. 3 weeks earlier, the same house had smelled like cinnamon and candles. My mother, Diana Whitmore, was setting the dining table as if preparing for a magazine shoot. Silver cutlery-pressed linens, a vase of hydrangeas from the garden she never let anyone touch. She had called it a family dinner, her tone light rehearsed. My sister Olivia was already there, leaning against the counter in her tailored cream blazer, scrolling through her phone. When I arrived, she looked up and smiled with that perfect dentist commercial grin that never reached her eyes. "Grace," she said, air kissing my cheek, "you look stable." I didn't ask what that meant. I just sat down and told myself to breathe. It had been 10 years since I moved out, since the night I left after one of our father's shouting matches ended, with glass shattered across the hallway. He was gone now, and somehow that silence felt worse than the noise ever did. Mom talked about the estate like it was a ghost that refused to leave. "Your father always believed in fairness," she said, slicing the roast. "He wanted both of you to handle the inheritance together." She paused just long enough for Olivia to add, "Which means compromise, Grace." I nodded, pretending I didn't already know what compromise meant in their vocabulary. It meant surrender. It meant do what Olivia wants. The house looked the same as when I was 17, white walls framed Degree's piano, polished to perfection, but the air felt different now, heavier. I caught Mom's eyes once across the table, and for the briefest second, her smile cracked. There was something behind it, calculation maybe, or guilt. But she looked away before I could decide which. After dinner, Olivia offered a tour of the house, though I had grown up in every corner of it. "I redecorated your old room," she said, pushing open the door to what used to be my sanctuary. The walls were now beige, stripped of color. The shelves where my books once sat held nothing but candles and abstract sculptures. Minimalist, she said proudly. You don't mind, right? I said nothing. That night, I lay in the guest room and listened to the house breathe. Somewhere down the hall, the grandfather clock ticked with the same rhythm it had when I was a child. My father's office door was locked as always, even though there was no one left to keep secrets in there. In the morning, Mom made pancakes humming softly, as if she could sing her way back to the mother she used to be. She asked about my work, about Ethan, my fiancé. I answered politely. Every word felt like diplomacy. She spoke about the trust fund with casual ease as though it were an errand, not a fortune. 3.2 million, she said, flipping a pancake. Your father wanted you both to manage it jointly. Such a simple request, yet here we are. Her tone was sweet, but her eyes were studying me. Do you still remember where the documents are? She added, pretending to stir syrup. Olivia laughed light but pointed. Mom, she barely remembers birthdays, let alone paperwork. My mother's gaze never left me. Maybe we should go over them together later, just to be sure everything's safe. Safe. The word lingered, sticky false. I smiled, but inside, I felt that old chill return, the one that warned me when love was about to turn into leverage. That night, while the house slept, I stood at the top of the staircase looking down into the foyer. Everything looked peaceful, but for the first time, I saw it for what it really was, not a home, but a stage. And my family was already rehearsing a play I hadn't agreed to perform in. The second week felt deceptively calm, the kind of quiet that hides rot beneath polished wood. My mother made tea every morning, Earl Grey with lemon, insisting we sit together before the day began. It's good to rebuild grace, she'd say, her tone sugar smooth, the kind used by people who are already planning your downfall. Olivia joined, sometimes always late, always composed. She talked about her company, her charity work, her designer renovation plans. Everything she said was a performance, a sermon about success. When I mentioned my job in financial consulting, she laughed softly. Oh, right, numbers! You were always good with those. Maybe you can help Mom and me organize Dad's portfolio. It's such a mess. My mother nodded approvingly, and that was how the trap began to take shape. At night, the house glowed with warm light. We watched old family movies in the living room, pretending nostalgia could glue back a family that had already fractured. There was a video of us as children chasing fireflies in the backyard. My father's voice laughed from behind the camera, steady and full of life. Olivia whispered, "He would have hated seeing us like this." For a moment, I almost believed her. I almost thought we were finding our way back. But small things began to change. My favorite mug went missing. The key to the study disappeared. My mother began mentioning mistakes I'd made in the past, minor things like missing her birthday or forgetting to return a call, but she repeated them so often that they became accusations. "You've always had trouble remembering, haven't you?" she'd say, gently. "It worries me." Once I found her on the phone, murmuring to someone about getting ahead of potential mental decline. When I asked who she was talking to, she smiled, said it was just a friend. Olivia played her part differently. She was all charm and concern, the good daughter. She'd drop small comments about my exhaustion, about how hard I'd been working. One night, she handed me a glass of wine and said, "You should relax more. You look tired." The next morning, I woke up with a headache so sharp it made my eyes water. My laptop had been moved, the password prompt open. I hadn't touched it. I checked the settings. 2 failed login attempts. Someone had tried during the night. That evening, I mentioned it at dinner. Olivia frowned. "Maybe you did it half asleep." My mother nodded. "You've seemed distracted lately." "Are you sure you're not forgetting things?" The way they looked at each other, so casual, so aligned, it was like watching 2 actors hit their cues perfectly. I forced a smile, but my heart pounded. They weren't just manipulating me, they were documenting a narrative, building a version of me that they could use. The next day, Mom brought up the trust again. "Your father wanted both of you to have equal control," she said, slicing apples at the counter. "Maybe we should consolidate everything in one joint account. It's easier for emergencies." I stirred my coffee and said nothing. Olivia reached across the counter and touched my hand. "It's about family grace, about protecting each other." I knew that phrase. My father used to say it before signing business deals that always benefited him more than anyone else. Family was the perfect disguise for control. That night, I sat alone in the guest room laptop, open lights off. I opened a new file labeled simply Documentation. I typed the date, the time, and every odd thing I had noticed: missing keys, wine glass login attempts. Every line felt like reclaiming an inch of air. My fingers trembled as I typed, not from fear, but from clarity. Downstairs, I could hear my mother humming again, her voice soft and eerie. It used to sound like love. Now it sounded like warning. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, the ticking of the old clock marking each second between who I used to be and who I was becoming. Somewhere in that house, the two women I had trusted most were rewriting my story, but they didn't realize I had already begun writing my own version. And this time, it would end differently. It happened on a Thursday morning, the kind of day that felt too normal to hold danger. The sky was pale, the kitchen smelled like toast and burnt coffee, and my mother was humming that same old hymn about grace and forgiveness. I was in the study looking for the estate binder, the one my father had used to store the trust documents, when I realized it wasn't where I left it. The shelf was neat dusted, but there was a small gap between volumes. I crouched down and scanned the titles again. Gone. I checked the desk drawers, even the locked cabinet. Nothing. When I asked Olivia if she had seen it, she didn't even look up from her phone. What binder, she said, swiping through a real estate app. I described it: the navy blue leather cover embossed with Dad's initials. She shrugged. You're probably mixing it up with one of your files. You always were scatterbrained. I wanted to believe her, but a chill crawled up my spine. Later that afternoon, I found my mother in the sunroom pruning roses. Mom, did you move Dad's estate folder? She didn't pause, just kept trimming petals. I thought Olivia took it to her office. She said you wanted her to look over it. I froze. I never said that. Her shears clicked again, crisp and deliberate. You must have forgotten, sweetheart. You've been so tense lately. Maybe write things down. The way she said it was almost tender, but the undertone was sharp as the metal in her hands. Gaslighting doesn't come as an explosion. It's a whisper that rewrites your memory one breath at a time. That evening, when I tried to log into the trust's shared account, the screen flashed red. Password incorrect. I hadn't changed it. My pulse quickened. I tried again. Locked out. I checked the notifications: 2 failed login attempts earlier that day, both from the home network. I heard footsteps in the hallway, light controlled. My mother knocked gently. Everything all right, dear? I closed the laptop. Fine. She lingered in the doorway, hands clasped, expression soft. I just wanted to make sure you're comfortable here. It's been years since you lived with family. There it was again. Family, the weaponized word. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 1:00 a.m., I heard Olivia's voice through the vent. She was on the phone, whispering fast, sharp syllables. She doesn't know it's gone. No, I have the notary form. She'll sign if Mom pushes right. My chest tightened. My fingers gripped the edge of the blanket until my knuckles whitened. I wanted to storm downstairs, demand answers, but something in me said, wait. Let them talk. Let them believe I was still blind. I wrote down every word I caught, time-stamped it. When her footsteps passed my door half an hour later, I pretended to be asleep. In the morning, Olivia greeted me with a bright smile, her hair perfect, her voice too sweet. You're up early, she said, pouring coffee. Rough night, I met her eyes and smiled back. No. Slept like a rock. For the first time, she blinked. Just once. The smallest crack in the mask. I went back to my room and opened my laptop again. This time, instead of trying to access the trust, I opened a new document and titled it Evidence. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat. I typed one line. They've started. But so have I. Outside, the wind picked up scattering rose petals across the porch. I watched them twist through the air and thought of my father's voice, steady and calm, telling me once that trust is earned in silence, but broken in whispers. Now, I could hear those whispers everywhere. By the next week, the air in the house had shifted. Every sound seemed to echo too long. Every silence felt loaded. My mother began keeping tabs on where I went, softly, politely, but constantly. Are you heading out again? She'd ask, drying dishes with slow, deliberate movements. You've been so restless lately. If I said I was running errands, she'd remind me about safety, about how women your age shouldn't drive too much alone. It was disguised as care, but underneath was a net tightening around me. Olivia joined in with her own brand of surveillance. She began dropping by my room without knocking, pretending to look for her phone charger or a missing scarf. I caught her once flipping through a drawer, and when she noticed me in the doorway, she just smiled. "Relax, you're so jumpy lately." I wanted to leave, but something kept me there. Part pride, part curiosity, part unfinished business. My father had trusted me to protect his legacy, and I wouldn't hand it to them so easily. Still, the house was wearing me down. It was like living inside someone else's breath, stale and inescapable. Then came the receipts. One afternoon, I found a note on the counter next to a grocery bill, a bright pink sticky note attached. It read, "Your share, 84,056 The items circled in red weren't even mine. I stared at the paper, waiting for it to make sense. When I asked Mom about it, she smiled tightly. "We just thought fairness keeps things clear, honey. That's how families stay strong." Olivia was scrolling her phone at the table, not looking up, but grinning. "Boundaries are healthy," she said. "You of all people should appreciate that." The next morning, there was another envelope, this time a breakdown of utilities color-coded printed. My name was listed next to every cost, water, electricity, internet. I laughed softly to myself, that fragile kind of laughter that cracks instead of comforts. They weren't even subtle anymore. I paid the total in cash, dropped it on the table, and said nothing. But I wrote it down in my file. That evening, I overheard Olivia in the living room whispering, "She's slipping, Mom. You can hear it in the way she talks. We should document it." My mother answered quietly, "Don't rush. Let her unravel." The following days blurred. I noticed my medication organizer had been moved. The Tuesday slot was empty, though I hadn't taken anything yet. My mother swore she was just tidying up. "I was worried you might mix them," she said. "You've seemed off lately." My stomach tightened. Gaslighting doesn't need violence to bruise. It just rearranges the furniture of your mind until you trip over your own certainty. I stopped drinking anything they poured for me. I started carrying my own thermos, my own food, my own keys. I installed a small wedge under my bedroom door at night. I told myself it was precaution, not paranoia, but the line between those two had already begun to blur. One night, I woke to the sound of whispers outside my room. My name low and slithering, followed by laughter. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty. The next morning, Mom suggested I take a few days off work. "You're burning out, Grace," she said. "Let Olivia handle things while you rest." I smiled back, calm and clear. "I'll rest when everything's settled." She didn't like that. Her face tightened, eyes flickering just enough for me to see the crack. Later that afternoon, Olivia came into my room carrying a folder. "These are just sample documents for the estate," she said, placing them on my bed. "Nothing urgent." I opened the folder after she left. Inside were bank authorization forms and a draft of power of attorney already filled out with my name, their signatures and a notary section blank and waiting. My hands went cold. The pen clipped to the folder bore the logo of my father's old law firm. I recognized the address. I'd been there once as a child. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk, scanning each page, documenting every date. I called Ethan, my fiancé, whispering so quietly I barely heard my own voice. "They're trying to take everything I said, not just the money me." He told me to leave to drive straight to him. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed proof so solid that no one could twist it. Around midnight, I walked downstairs to the study. The window was open, curtains fluttering. A faint scent of Olivia's perfume hung in the air. On the desk was a small black notebook half hidden beneath a pile of mail. I opened it. Inside were scribbled notes, account numbers, passwords, meeting times. Next to my name, a single line read, "Needs evaluation. Mother will handle medical certification." My vision blurred. They weren't just plotting theft. They were preparing to declare me unfit. I snapped photos of every page, uploaded them to my secure drive, and hid the notebook under my mattress. As dawn broke, the house seemed quieter than ever. My mother's door was closed, Olivia's car gone. I stood in the hallway, staring at my reflection in the framed mirror. My cheek was pale, my eyes sharper than they had been in years. "You're not crazy," I whispered to my reflection. You're just surrounded by people who need you to be." For the first time, I believed it. It was raining the night everything shattered. Not a cinematic downpour, just that steady, relentless drizzle that makes the world feel damp and tired. I had gone to my room early, pretending exhaustion. My door locked my laptop open on a hidden VPN as I backed up every file, every photo of the stolen notebook, every time-stamped note. I was one click away from sending it all to my attorney when I heard a sound that froze me mid-breath. The click of my doorknob. Someone was trying the handle. Softly at first, then with more pressure. I slipped my phone into my pocket and stood still. The lock held, but the knob kept turning. Then, silence. Footsteps retreated down the hallway. I waited 5 minutes before opening the door. The hall was empty, but the faint scent of my mother's rose perfume lingered like a ghost. The next morning, I came downstairs to find her sitting at the table, calm, sipping tea. Olivia stood by the window, arms folded. "We need to talk," my mother said. Her voice had that brittle patience she used on nurses and bank tellers when she wanted something. "Your behavior lately has been concerning. You've been paranoid, forgetful, erratic." I laughed once dry and sharp. "You mean alert." Olivia's tone turned professional. "We think it's stress, Grace. You've been through a lot. That's why we arranged a consultation." She slid a paper across the table, an appointment confirmation with a psychiatrist I'd never heard of. "Mom and I will drive you. It's just an evaluation." I looked from the form to their faces. "You're trying to have me declared incompetent." My mother's smile didn't falter. "Sweetheart, no one's trying anything. We're helping you." The word help burned hotter than any insult. I stood up my chair, scraping the tile. "Cancel it." "Grace," my mother said quietly, "if you refuse, we'll have to proceed legally." That was it. The confirmation. The mask finally dropped. I left the table, walked straight to the door, and didn't look back. My hands shook as I started the car. I didn't even grab my coat. I drove aimlessly at first, through sheets of rain until I pulled into a diner 2 towns over. The neon sign flickered, the kind of place that smelled like coffee and despair. I sat in the corner booth and called Ethan. My voice cracked only once when I said the words out loud. "They're trying to erase me." He told me to stay put. Within an hour, he was there. He listened without interrupting, then said quietly, "We'll get proof, but you can't go back there alone." I looked out the window, the rain blurring everything into streaks of silver. "I have to. My father's will, his letters, they're still in that house. If they destroy those, I lose everything." That night, we made a plan. Ethan called an old friend of his, a lawyer with connections in private investigations. I shared the notebook photos, the receipts, the fake power of attorney draft. "Start there," Ethan told him. "She's being set up for guardianship fraud." 2 days later, I returned to the house. Everything looked deceptively normal. My mother was pruning her roses again. Olivia was on the phone in the hallway, voice low and fast. I walked straight past them into my father's office. The lock was broken. The desk drawers were empty. "Looking for something?" Olivia's voice came from behind me. I turned. Her smile was cold, triumphant. "You should have just signed Grace. It would have been easier for everyone." "Everyone meaning you." She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "You were always the mistake. Dad spoiled you because you reminded him of her, the woman he cheated with. He told Mom everything before he died. That's why she'll never choose you." The words hit like a slap. "You're lying." She shrugged. "Maybe, but she believes it." For a moment, the room tilted. Then something inside me hardened. "You both made one mistake," I said quietly. "You underestimated me." I walked past her out to the driveway and dialed 911. "There's been domestic violence," I told the dispatcher, voice steady. "My sister hit me. My mother assaulted me. I have evidence of ongoing financial fraud. I need officers dispatched to 428 Whitmore Lane." As the operator confirmed the address, Olivia's footsteps echoed behind me. "Grace, what did you do?" I turned. "What you taught me, Olivia. I made it fair." The first siren pierced the air. A minute later, a rising wail that sliced through the rain. My mother appeared in the doorway, hands trembling, mouth moving soundlessly. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes, not of guilt, but of exposure. The cruiser lights flashed across the wet pavement, painting the house blue and red. I didn't move when the officers approached. I just handed them my phone, the folder, and said, "Start here." One officer glanced at the photos, then at me. "You sure you want to go through with this?" I looked at the house behind me, that shrine of control and silence, and nodded. I'm done being their daughter. I'm ready to be their witness. The words left my mouth like an exhale that had waited years to escape. The following morning, I woke up in a guest room at Ethan's apartment, my body sore and bruised, but my mind painfully awake. The previous night had unfolded in flashes. Police lights clipped questions, the cold press of gauze on my lip. They had taken photos, logged statements, and led my mother and Olivia separately into the kitchen. When an officer finally said, "You're safe now," the words sounded foreign, like they belonged to someone else. Safety wasn't a state, it was paperwork, evidence, and distance. 2 detectives arrived mid-morning, their suits wrinkled from overnight shifts, their notebooks already half-filled. Detective Harlan, the older one, spoke softly but with that flat tone people use when they've seen too much. "We've confirmed your report," he said. "Medical records will document the physical injuries. The financial side might take longer, but your copies help. A lot." I handed him the flash drive. "It has screenshots of login attempts, the draft, POA, the utility invoices, all dated. And there's a voice memo." He nodded. "We'll extract what we can." As he flipped through the pages, the younger Detective Ramirez asked, "Any idea why your sister and mother would target you?" I hesitated, then answered, "Control. It's always been about control." That day blurred into hours of retelling statements, signatures, legal clarifications. By late afternoon, exhaustion hit like a wave. Ethan drove me to the station for one final interview before the weekend. I sat across from Detective Harlan again. He showed me photos of documents seized from the house that morning under a warrant, my father's will half burned in the fireplace, and the black notebook I had photographed, its pages torn. They were trying to destroy evidence, he said. That helps your case. It shows intent. Intent. That word felt like oxygen. 2 days later, a restraining order was filed. Olivia violated it within 24 hours, showing up outside Ethan's building in her white SUV. She didn't try to get out. She just sat there staring up at the windows, the reflection of her face pale and ghost-like in the windshield. Ethan called the police. They towed the car after an hour, but the damage had been done. My peace fractured again. I started therapy that week at Ethan's insistence. The therapist's office was small with plants on every shelf. She asked gentle questions at first, the kind that sound simple until you realize they demand truth. "When did you first learn to make yourself small to keep peace?" she asked. I stared at my hands. "When I was 8, I said. When Mom started crying every time I disagreed with her. As the investigation deepened, the detectives found patterns that made my stomach twist. My mother had opened a separate account 6 months earlier, listing Olivia as co-signer. Large withdrawals matched the timeline of her home renovations. A fake medical report surfaced dated just 2 weeks before the assault, claiming I suffered from early cognitive decline. The signature belonged to a doctor whose license had been suspended. When Detective Ramirez read that aloud, my knees nearly buckled. "They were laying groundwork to institutionalize you," she said quietly. To get guardianship, they needed medical proof. The horror wasn't cinematic, it was bureaucratic. The system they tried to weaponize against me had almost worked. Meanwhile, the small town of Crestfield whispered. The Whitmores had been local royalty donors to the community center fixtures at church events. Now people crossed the street when they saw my mother. Olivia's company website quietly removed her bio. A neighbor sent me a photo of her empty house at night, lights-off mailbox stuffed with letters. But justice doesn't move with gossip. It moves with documents, subpoenas, signatures. One evening, Harlan called. "We've got enough to move forward," he said. "Fraud, attempted coercion, destruction of financial records, and assault. The district attorney wants your testimony." I stared at the city skyline through Ethan's window. "Do I have to see them?" "Not yet," he said. "But you will." The trial date was set for early spring. I spent those months preparing rehearsing questions, reviewing exhibits, cataloging memories I'd rather erase. Some nights I woke from dreams of my mother's perfume, of Olivia's laugh echoing in the hallway. The day before the preliminary hearing, a letter arrived at Ethan's address. No return name, just a postmark from Crestfield. Inside was a single sheet of paper typed unsigned. "Withdraw your complaint. You don't want the world to know what really happened that summer." I stared at the sentence until the words blurred. Ethan read it over my shoulder. "They're bluffing." But I knew they weren't. They were reminding me of the family secret, the one my father had buried under legal silence years ago. Something about land deeds, something about betrayal. I didn't know all the details then, but I would soon. When I turned the paper over, there was a faint watermark Olivia's company logo. The next morning, I handed it to Detective Harlan. He studied it for a long moment before saying, "Sometimes the people who think they're untouchable forget the world has changed." His words stayed with me. That night, I sat at Ethan's kitchen table and opened my laptop. I began to draft something that wasn't a report, wasn't a statement, just a letter to myself. It began with 3 words. You were right. Because in a house full of lies, believing your own sanity is the first act of rebellion. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper and polish, that sterile scent of places where lives get rewritten by signatures. I arrived early wearing a navy suit Ethan had insisted on buying for me. You look like truth, he'd said that morning, and though I laughed, part of me clung to the words. Truth was all I had left to wear. Olivia and my mother sat across the aisle at the defense table, immaculate as ever. My mother's pearls gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Olivia's expression was carved from marble cold, perfect, unbothered. She didn't look at me, not once. Their lawyer, a man with a voice too smooth for his own good, opened with a story about family misunderstandings, about how grief and stress had distorted perception. He used words like fragile, confused, emotional, all aimed at me. I sat still, hands folded, heart steady. Let them talk. Let them dig their hole. When it was our turn, my attorney, Mr. Lowell, stood. "Your Honor, he said this case isn't about confusion. It's about strategy, financial, psychological, and deliberate." He began laying out the evidence, the missing files, the fake invoices, the falsified medical report. Each document clicked into place like pieces of a lock turning open. The judge, a woman with steel gray hair and the patience of a saint, leaned forward as Lowell spoke. Then he played the recording. My breath caught. It was Olivia's voice, low and distinct, captured on a neighbor's doorbell camera the night before the assault. "She'll sign," she'd said. "Mom just needs to push harder. She's too soft." The words filled the courtroom, sharp as glass. Olivia's jaw tightened. My mother flinched for the first time. When the defense tried to pivot, claiming I'd fabricated the audio, Detective Harlan stepped up with the authentication report. Voice match. 98% certainty. The silence that followed wasn't relief. It was a slow, measured kind of justice. Then came my turn to testify. My name echoed in the room, distant and strange. I took the stand, raised my right hand, and swore to tell the truth. My voice trembled on the first sentence, then steadied. I described the months of subtle manipulation, the missing binder, the bills marked your share the night of the assault. I didn't dramatize. I didn't need to. The truth had its own gravity. When I spoke about the gaslighting, the slow erosion of self, I saw something flicker in the judge's eyes. Recognition. The defense tried to corner me. Ms. Whitmore, the lawyer, said, "Isn't it true that you've been under psychological stress, that your recollections might be colored by emotion?" I met his gaze. "I've been under attack. There's a difference." He blinked, thrown off rhythm. My attorney smiled faintly. By mid-afternoon, both sides rested. The courtroom buzzed softly like an electrical current of unease. When the judge called for recess, I stepped outside into the hall. My knees were weak, my palms damp, but there was something else humming inside me, a strange steadiness. Ethan was waiting by the vending machines, a small coffee in each hand. "You were brilliant," he said. "You made them look small." I wanted to believe that. When the verdict came 2 days later, the courtroom was packed. The judge read slowly, her tone deliberate. Given the presented evidence, the court finds sufficient cause to proceed with criminal charges of fraud, coercion, and assault. Temporary conservatorship petitions are hereby voided. All accounts frozen under false authorization shall be restored. My mother gasped. Olivia's face drained of color, her practiced composure cracking like glass under heat. The bailiff called for order. I sat still, my heartbeat louder than the murmurs rising in the room. Afterward, outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Cameras clicked, voices shouted questions. "Grace, what do you want to say to your family? Do you forgive them?" I stopped on the steps, the wind tugging at my hair. "Forgiveness," I said quietly, "isn't the same as forgetting. I'll forgive when the truth stops bleeding." The microphones froze. Then silence. The kind that tastes like freedom. That evening, I went home to Ethan's apartment. We didn't talk much. I poured wine into 2 glasses, and for the first time in months, it didn't taste like fear. I opened the folder of legal updates. The investigation was expanding new names, new accounts. Olivia and my mother weren't the only ones involved. A financial advisor who had worked with them was under review. The web was bigger than I'd known. I sat on the couch and stared out the window at the city lights. Somewhere below those glittering windows, other women were sitting at kitchen tables doubting their own memories because someone they loved told them to. I wished I could reach through the glass and tell them, "You're not crazy. They just need you to think you are." The next morning, I got up early and went for a walk. The air was cold clean. The world hadn't changed, but I had. A month after the hearing, the investigation was far from over. The DA's office had moved to a full indictment, and I was beginning to breathe again, or at least trying to. Then one afternoon, Detective Ramirez called and said, "You'd better come in. We found something in the recovered files you should see." When I arrived at the station, she was waiting in the evidence room, a beige folder in her hand. Inside was a notarized addendum to my father's will dated 6 months before his death. It had been sealed in a private safety deposit box that only Olivia could access as executor. The document stated that a portion of the Whitmore estate, valued at over $3 million, was to be divided only between his daughters under one condition: both had to sign the acceptance together in good faith. If either used coercion, legal manipulation, or violence, her share would be revoked and redistributed to a named charitable foundation. Ramirez looked up at me. "They must have found this clause before you did," she said. "It explains everything. Everything. The sudden charm, the invitations to dinner, the fake care. They hadn't wanted reconciliation. They'd wanted compliance. If I refused to sign, they couldn't access the money. But if they could paint me as incompetent or dead, they could claim I'd forfeited my share." My hands trembled as I traced my father's signature. He had built his legacy on foresight, on anticipating betrayal. He must have known something like this could happen, and he had tried in his quiet, meticulous way to protect me even after death. The DA's office filed a new charge: attempted fraudulent execution of a will. The news spread quickly through Crestfield. The whispers that had once pitied me now carried something sharper: disbelief, then anger. The Whitmore name, once polished to perfection, was now a stain on the social pages. Olivia was arrested first. The image of her being led into custody, flanked by officers head high but eyes hollow, circulated online. My mother turned herself in 2 days later, escorted by her attorney. She refused to speak even when the reporters shouted her name. The trial for the financial crimes began that spring. I sat through every day of it, flanked by my lawyer and Ethan. The prosecution presented their evidence: falsified reports, emails, the audio recordings, and finally the missing clause from the will. When they played Olivia's voice saying she won't sign willingly, but we can fix that, my stomach turned. The defense tried to argue stress, grief, mental illness, anything but intent, but the paper trail was too precise, too orchestrated. The courtroom watched in silence as each exhibit peeled back another layer of their lies. My mother stared at the table most of the time, unmoving. Olivia alternated between fury and tears. On the final day, I took the stand again. Not as a victim, but as a beneficiary, reclaiming what had been stolen. My father believed in fairness, I said, voice steady. He didn't just build wealth, he built accountability. My family forgot that. I didn't. When the verdict came, it landed like a stone in still water: fraudulent intent, confirmed sentences pending. The judge ordered restitution, asset seizure, and mandatory psychological evaluation for both defendants. My share of the inheritance was legally reinstated under my full control, along with a portion of the revoked funds to be directed toward a cause of my choosing. Outside, reporters swarmed again. A woman from a major network asked Grace, "What are you going to do with the money now that you've won?" I paused, watching the courthouse doors swing shut behind me. It was never about winning, I said. It was about stopping the cycle. The money will do what family couldn't: it'll protect someone else. That night, I went home and opened the same journal where this story had begun. I wrote one line beneath my last entry: "Justice isn't loud, it's consistent." Ethan cooked dinner, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the sound of a clattering pan didn't make me flinch. The rain outside had softened into mist. I stepped onto the balcony, breathing in the cool air, the scent of wet earth and jasmine. Somewhere behind me, the news played low on the TV, my mother's lawyer speaking about appeals and emotional duress. I turned it off. The world could debate their excuses. I'd already seen the truth. Later that night, a letter arrived by courier. No sender, just my name in looping handwriting. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph my father younger standing in the garden with both his daughters. His handwriting on the back read, "Fairness doesn't mean equal, it means earned." I set it on the table beside my tea. Outside, the night was quiet. The storm that had once consumed my life had finally spent itself, leaving only clarity behind. The weeks after the verdict were a strange kind of silence. It wasn't peace yet, more like the echo that lingers after a storm. My name began appearing in local papers, always followed by words like victim inheritance scandal or landmark conviction. I avoided reading them. I'd lived the story. I didn't need to see it reduced to headlines. Still, sometimes when I walked through Crestfield's small downtown, I could feel the stares. Pity from some, curiosity from others, and a few who looked at me like I'd betrayed an unspoken rule that family secrets were supposed to stay buried. Ethan wanted me to leave town. Start fresh, he said, somewhere that doesn't carry their shadows. But I wasn't ready to run. I wanted to see what was left after the collapse. So I went back to the house on Whitmore Lane. The property had been placed under court supervision pending liquidation. The gate was padlocked, but the realtor gave me an hour to walk through before it was cleared. The moment I stepped inside, the air hit me like memory rose perfume lemon polish, the faint ghost of my father's tobacco. The rooms looked smaller now, stripped of grandeur and illusion. The chandelier that once glittered above every argument was gone, replaced by an empty socket. In the study, scorch marks still blackened the fireplace bricks where Olivia had tried to burn the will. I ran my hand over the mantel and whispered, "You were right, Dad." They showed themselves. In my old bedroom, sunlight filtered through cracked blinds, illuminating dust suspended midair like frozen time. I found one thing left behind, a small wooden jewelry box I hadn't seen in years. Inside was a locket with my initials carved into the back and a faded photograph of my parents on their wedding day. My father was smiling at her like she was the only person in the room. My mother's smile was something else calculated, already measuring what she'd gain. I closed the box and set it back down. Some ghosts didn't need company. Outside, the garden was wild. The roses my mother used to prune within an inch of their lives had grown into a tangle of thorns and blooms, vibrant, defiant. I stood there for a long time, watching the wind move through the petals. It felt like the house itself was exhaling for the first time in decades. A few days later, the sentencing hearing was held. My mother was given 5 years suspended after 2 for cooperation. Olivia got 8 with eligibility for parole after 4. When the judge asked if I had a statement, I said, "No, Your Honor." The evidence spoke louder than I ever could. But later outside the courthouse, I did speak to a reporter who asked if I felt vindicated. Vindicated, I repeated. No, just finished. I didn't attend the press conference that followed. I drove to the cemetery instead. My father's grave sat beneath an old oak, the stone simple and clean. I placed a single rose, wild, not trimmed, and whispered, "It's over." But even as I said it, I knew endings aren't real. They're pauses before the next reckoning. When I got home that evening, there was a letter waiting. It was from my mother's lawyer. Inside, a short note in my mother's handwriting. "You were always the clever one. I just wish you'd learned loyalty instead." I folded it and slipped it into the trash without reading it again. For once, her words carried no weight. The following week, I met with Mr. Lowell to finalize the restitution funds. He asked what I wanted to do with the charitable portion my father's clause had designated. "I'm starting something new," I said. "A trust for women who've been manipulated by their families. Legal help counseling, safe housing, the things I wish I'd had sooner." He nodded. "We'll make it official." That night, Ethan and I sat on the balcony of his apartment. The air was cool, the city humming below us. "Do you ever think you'll forgive them?" he asked. I thought about it for a long time. Forgiveness is just another form of control when it's expected. I don't owe them that. I took a sip of tea and added, "But I'll stop hating them. That's my version of freedom." The next morning, I packed what little I owned, just a few clothes, my journal, the old locket, and the court documents, and drove west. I didn't know where I was heading yet, only that the road ahead didn't lead back. Somewhere along the highway, the first sunlight broke through the clouds golden and sharp, and I realized I wasn't escaping. I was reclaiming. As the radio hummed low, I whispered into the open car. "You were right, Dad. Fairness isn't equal, it's earned." For the first time in years, the words didn't sound like defiance. They sounded like peace. I moved to a small town 3 hours south of Crestfield, a place where no one recognized the Whitmore name, and the local diner still used paper menus and cash registers that dinged when you opened them. The house I rented was modest white shutters, creaky floors, a garden that had been left wild. The first few mornings I woke expecting the old sounds, my mother's clipped footsteps in the hall, Olivia's voice dripping through the walls, but all I heard was birdsong and wind. Silence, when it isn't weaponized, can be medicine. I spent the first weeks unpacking the life I'd managed to save. The journal went on my bedside table. The locket stayed in a drawer. I opened my laptop and drafted the first framework for the foundation I'd promised the Fairstead Trust, named after my father's words and what they finally meant. Its mission would be to help women disentangle themselves from coercive family dynamics, legal aid, financial literacy, trauma therapy. I reached out to Mr. Lowell, who offered pro bono guidance, and to 2 other survivors from a support group my therapist had connected me to. They knew the terrain too well. Together, we started sketching an outline, workshops, partnerships, a hotline. It was slow work, but every document I signed felt like reclaiming another piece of me. The first donation came from a retired teacher in Iowa who wrote, "Your story gave me courage to leave my son's house. He told me I was too old to handle my own money. He was wrong." I cried reading it, then printed the message and pinned it to my wall. Proof that pain can become instruction. Some nights I still dreamed of the house on Whitmore Lane. Sometimes the dreams ended in shouting, sometimes in silence. My therapist said trauma doesn't vanish, it rearranges itself. "Healing isn't forgetting grace," she said one afternoon, "it's remembering without flinching." So I practiced not flinching. By spring, the trust had gained attention. A small local paper ran a piece titled "From Victim to Founder: How One Woman Turned Betrayal into a Blueprint for Justice." They asked to take a photo of me in my new home. I wore a simple navy sweater and stood in front of the untamed garden. When the article was published, I read the first line 3 times. Grace Whitmore refuses to let her last name define her future. That week, letters began arriving. Handwritten, emailed, typed. Stories from women across the country. Sisters disowned mothers, manipulated daughters, gaslit out of inheritances and identities. Their words filled my inbox like echoes of my own life. I replied to each one, even if only to say, "I hear you." Ethan visited on weekends. We didn't talk much about the past anymore. He'd bought an old camera, started photographing landscapes. One evening, he showed me a picture of the sea-gray, endless calm. "That's you," he said. I smiled, though part of me knew calm wasn't permanent. Peace, I was learning, wasn't a destination. It was maintenance. Then one afternoon in late May, an envelope arrived. The return address was the state penitentiary. I knew the handwriting before I opened it. Olivia. The letter was short. "Grace, I've been reading about what you're doing. I don't expect forgiveness, but I do understand now. I see how far we went. Mom doesn't. She still says you betrayed us, but I wanted you to know Dad's claws wasn't lost on me. You earned it, all of it." I read it twice, then folded it carefully. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel pity. Just quiet comprehension. Sometimes accountability looks like a letter that arrives too late to change anything, but not too late to mean something. That evening, I walked to the edge of my property where the fence gave way to open field. The sun was sinking, painting everything in the same amber light I remembered from my father's study window. I thought about the word legacy. For years, I'd believed it meant money, property, things you could list and divide. But standing there, the wind in my hair, I understood. Legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what you rebuild after everything's been taken. When I got back inside, I sat at my desk, opened my journal, and wrote, "I am not what they did to me. I am what I built after." That night, as I turned off the lamp, I realized the house no longer felt temporary. It wasn't an escape anymore. It was mine. By the time summer came, the air itself felt lighter. The Fairstead Trust had moved from an idea to a living thing. We had a small office in town, a converted brick storefront with a single brass plaque by the door that read, "Dignity, Justice, Renewal." The phone rang every day now. Some calls were simple questions about legal paperwork. Others were cries for help that arrived between sobs and static. I learned to listen first and speak second. When I told women, "You are not crazy," I could hear the pause on the other end, the moment when disbelief cracked just enough for hope to slip through. The first support group met on a Thursday evening. 6 women sat in folding chairs, coffee and paper cups, the fluorescent lights humming softly above. I told them pieces of my story, not the courtroom or the violence, but the quiet unraveling before it. The way manipulation starts as concern. The way love becomes a currency and how silence becomes survival. When I finished, no one spoke for a full minute. Then a woman named Lorraine said I thought I was the only one. That was the moment the trust became more than paperwork. It became purpose. Outside, life was simple again. I planted wildflowers along the fence, let the garden stay imperfect. Ethan took more photographs. We stopped labeling our relationship. Some nights he stayed, some nights he didn't. Freedom, I'd learned, wasn't about distance, it was about choice. I chose calm. I chose quiet. One morning, near the end of July, a letter arrived stamped Federal Department of Justice. My hands didn't shake as I opened it. Inside was confirmation restitution payments completed, case officially closed. The line that mattered most was near the bottom. Ms. Whitmore has been cleared of all pending claims. Her record remains unblemished. For the first time in years, I let out a sound that was half laughter, half release. The fight was finally over. Not in theory, not in stages, but officially. That weekend, I drove back to Crestfield one last time. The Whitmore house had been sold, repainted gray, the roses uprooted, the gate replaced. The new owners were kind enough to let me walk the property. The air smelled different, as if the ground itself had exhaled the poison. In the back garden, where the soil had been turned over, I buried a small box. Inside was the letter from Olivia, my mother's note, and the locket with my parents' photo. I didn't need to keep symbols of the past to honor what I'd survived. As I stood up, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain. For a moment, I could almost hear my father's voice again. "Fairness isn't equal, it's earned," I whispered back. "I know, Dad. I did." Driving home, the sunset stretched across the horizon in soft oranges and rose gold. I stopped at a gas station, bought a cup of coffee, and sat in the car, watching the world move around me. Nobody stared. Nobody whispered. I was just another person living an ordinary day. And that I realized was the truest kind of freedom. Back home, the Trust's first scholarship recipient arrived for an interview, a young woman named Kayla, 22, whose family had tried to seize her late grandmother's land. She sat across from me, nervous but determined. "I read about you," she said quietly. "What you did. It made me believe I could fight back too." I smiled and handed her the acceptance letter already prepared. "You already did, Kayla. You're here." That night, after she left, I walked through the office alone. The walls were lined with framed letters from donors, volunteers, survivors. The last one, hung near the door, held a quote I'd written months earlier in my journal. "Survival isn't loud, it's steady." I turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped outside. The air was warm, humming with crickets. I looked up at the sky, wide and endless, and realized I no longer needed revenge validation or apology. Justice had come, but healing had stayed. As I drove home, the headlights traced the narrow country road ahead. Somewhere beyond the curve, new seasons waited, ones I wouldn't have to fight my way through. When I reached my driveway, I parked and just sat there listening to the engine fade. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked softer now, older but unbroken. I whispered to it the same words I had written on the first page of my journal all those months ago. "I am still here." And this time the words didn't sound like defiance. They sounded like truth.